In this video, I'll be sharing the horrifying experience that my friends and I had when we decided to use a Ouija board to communicate with the spirit world. It was a night that none of us will ever forget, and one that left us all deeply scarred. We had always been fascinated by the idea of communicating with spirits, and we thought that using a Ouija board would be a fun and exciting way to do it. Little did we know that we were playing with forces that were far beyond our understanding. The board itself was old and worn, and it had been passed down through my family for generations. My grandmother had always warned me about the dangers of using a Ouija board, but I had never taken her warnings seriously. As we gathered around the board, we could feel a sense of excitement and anticipation in the air. We placed our fingers on the planchette, and as we began to ask questions, it started to move on its own. At first, the messages that came through were benign and harmless. We asked questions about the future, and the planchette spelled out answers that seemed to be accurate. But as we continued to use the board, things started to take a sinister turn. The planchette started to move faster and faster, and the messages that came through became more cryptic and disturbing. We felt a sense of unease in the room, and we could feel a presence that seemed to be watching us. As we asked more questions, the planchette spelled out the name of a person that none of us had ever heard of before. We asked the spirit to reveal its identity, and the planchette spelled out a series of letters that didn't make any sense. Suddenly, the room grew cold, and we could feel a sense of malevolence in the air. We asked the spirit if it was a friendly one, and the planchette spelled out a resounding no. That's when things started to get really scary. We heard footsteps coming from the hallway, but when we looked, there was no one there. The room was filled with an eerie silence, and we could feel an evil presence in the room. The planchette started moving on its own, spelling out messages that seemed to be warning us of something. We asked the spirit if it meant us any harm, and the planchette spelled out the word leave. We tried to end the session, but the planchette wouldn't move from the board. We were trapped, and we could feel an evil force taking control of the board. That's when things took a turn for the worse. We heard a loud bang from the hallway, and the door slammed shut on its own. We could hear voices coming from the other side of the door, but when we tried to open it, it wouldn't budge. The room was filled with a sense of dread, and we could feel an unseen force in the room. The planchette continued to move on its own, spelling out messages that seemed to be taunting us. We were trapped in the room for what felt like hours, and we could feel the energy in the room growing more and more malevolent with each passing moment. We tried to end the session again and again, but the planchette wouldn't move from the board. Finally, we decided to make a run for it. We grabbed the board and the planchette and ran out of the room as fast as we could. As we reached the safety of the outdoors, we heard a blood-curdling scream coming from inside the house. We knew that we had awakened something that we could never put back to sleep. The Ouija board had opened a portal to a dark and malevolent force that had now been unleashed upon us. From that night on, we were haunted by the presence that we had awakened. We would hear footsteps in the hallway and see shadows moving across the walls. Objects would move on their own, and we would feel a sense of malevolence in the air. We knew that we had made a grave mistake by using the Ouija board, and we could never go back to the way things were before. The spirits that we had awakened would never let us go, and we were forever changed by the experience. In the end, we learned a valuable lesson about the dangers of playing with forces that we couldn't control. We had opened a door that could never be closed, and we would have to live with the consequences of our actions for the rest of our lives. If you're thinking about using a Ouija board to communicate with the dead, I urge you to reconsider. The consequences of such actions can be dire, and you never know what kind of malevolent forces you might be dealing with. Stay safe, and stay away from the dark and dangerous world of the supernatural. The price you pay might be too high to bear. In a small town nestled in the heart of the forest, there was a group of friends who loved to explore the wilderness. They were always looking for adventure and excitement, and they never backed down from a challenge. One day, as they were hiking through the dense woods, they stumbled upon an old cabin that looked like it hadn't been lived in for years. Intrigued by the possibility of finding something exciting, they decided to investigate. The cabin was old and dilapidated, with cobwebs covering the corners and dust coating every surface. The friends explored the rooms one by one, but found nothing of interest. That is, until they came across a hidden door in the basement. Curiosity got the better of them, and they decided to see what was behind the door. As they descended the rickety staircase, they heard strange whispers and felt an unexplainable chill in the air. At the bottom of the staircase, they found an old Ouija board lying on a dusty table. Excited by the possibility of communicating with the dead, they decided to try it out. They placed their fingers on the planchette and asked if there were any spirits in the cabin. To their surprise, the planchette started moving on its own, spelling out the name of a girl who had died in the cabin many years ago. The friends were thrilled by the experience and decided to continue communicating with the spirit. But as the night wore on, things started to take a dark turn. The planchette started moving faster and faster, spelling out ominous messages and warnings. The friends became more and more scared as the spirit revealed that it was not alone in the cabin. Suddenly, the room went dark and a cold wind started blowing through the basement. The friends tried to leave, but the door was stuck and wouldn't budge. They were trapped. As the spirit continued to communicate with them, they realized that they had awakened a dark and malevolent force that they couldn't control. The cabin was now filled with the spirits of those who had died there, and they were all angry and vengeful. The friends were forced to spend the night in the cabin as the spirits tormented them with terrifying visions and unexplainable noises. They realized too late that they had made a grave mistake in using the Ouija board, and that they would never be able to escape the cabin alive. As morning came, the friends were found dead in the cabin with no signs of trauma or struggle. The cause of their deaths was never determined, and the cabin remained abandoned for years to come. The lesson to be learned from this tragic story is clear: never play with forces that you cannot control. The Ouija board is not a toy, and the consequences of using it can be dire. The friends in this story learned this lesson too late, and their lives were forever changed by their fateful decision. It started out as a harmless game, just something for a group of friends to do on a boring Saturday night. They had heard stories about the Ouija board and how it could connect them to the spirit world, but they never really believed it. It was all just a bit of fun, or so they thought. The group gathered around the board, their fingers resting lightly on the planchette as they asked if there were any spirits present. At first, nothing happened. But then, the planchette started moving on its own, spelling out words that made the hairs on the back of their necks stand up. The group asked the spirit questions, and it responded with increasingly specific answers. They learned that the spirit was a young woman who had died in a car accident on the same stretch of road they were currently sitting on. They were skeptical at first, but as the night wore on, the messages from the spirit became more and more eerie. Suddenly, the planchette started moving rapidly, and the group felt a strange energy in the room. The spirit was no longer friendly, and they realized too late that they had summoned something far more dangerous than they ever could have imagined. The room went dark, and the group felt a cold wind blowing through the open windows. They could hear strange whispers and unexplainable noises, and the planchette continued to move on its own, spelling out messages that terrified them to their core. They tried to leave the room, but the door was stuck, and they were trapped inside. The spirit was angry, and it wanted revenge. The group realized too late that they had made a grave mistake and that they were in serious danger. As the night wore on, the group was tormented by terrifying visions and unexplainable phenomena. They could hear footsteps in the hallway, whispers in their ears, and see shadows moving in the corners of their eyes. One by one, the group members started to disappear, their bodies found days later in strange and horrifying circumstances. The police were baffled by the deaths, and the only clue they had was the Ouija board sitting in the middle of the room. The board was taken away as evidence, but it was never seen again. Rumors spread that it had somehow been destroyed, but others whispered that it was still out there, waiting for someone foolish enough to summon its dark powers once again. The lesson of this terrifying tale is clear: be careful what you wish for, and never play with forces you don't understand. The Ouija board is a dangerous tool that should be handled with extreme caution, lest it bring about the wrath of the spirit world.